Hey guys, in today's video I bring you a breathtaking story. Let's meet Raven Carter, a teacher who was declared dead for 33 minutes and had an unforgettable encounter with Jesus. During her near-death experience, she discovered the surprising power of prayers and how they transform lives in the spiritual world. What she saw and heard will forever change the way you view faith and the power of prayer. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Get ready for an exciting and transformative journey. Tuesday started like any other. The sun was shining brightly in Charleston, and the mild weather seemed to promise a peaceful day. At the elementary school where I worked, the hallways were filled with children's laughter and murmurs. To others, it seemed like just another ordinary day, but to me, there was something different. I felt a weight in my chest, as if something was wrong. I ignored it, thinking it was just accumulated tiredness. After all, teaching full-time is not for the faint of heart. As I walked down the main hallway, my colleague Eleanor Drake, the school nurse, passed me holding a package of bandages. "Raven, are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I replied, but even my voice sounded shaky. "I just need a moment." Little did I know that that moment would be the last one I would have that day. I was helping a student, Tyler, find his forgotten lunch in his locker when I felt dizziness hit me. My vision became blurry, and the sound around me seemed distant, as if I were underwater. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my chest. I tried to breathe, but it was as if all the oxygen had been ripped from me. My knees gave out, and before I knew it, I was falling to the ground. The cold floor was the last thing I remembered feeling. I could vaguely hear worried voices around me. "Raven, Raven, stay with me!" Eleanor shouted, her voice full of urgency. There was a frantic struggle as she tried to revive me. The sound of quick footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone called the paramedics, but at some point, the sound disappeared completely, and I was enveloped by absolute silence. Suddenly, everything changed. It was as if I had been ripped out of the physical world. I felt an indescribable lightness. I looked down and saw my body on the floor, Eleanor kneeling beside me, determinedly giving chest compressions. Other teachers looked on in horror as curious students were turned away. Am I dead? I thought. But the feeling was not fear. On the contrary, there was a peace I had never experienced before. A gentle force pulled me upward, moving me further and further away from that scene. A warm, inviting light appeared before me, and everything around me was filled with a love so intense it seemed almost palpable. The light around me was so intense that it seemed to pierce my being. But it was not a light that hurt or blinded. On the contrary, she conveyed warmth, security, and a love that surpassed anything I could understand. I floated toward her, feeling like every bit of the weight I had carried in my life was being lifted, as if the burden of years of worry, tiredness, and doubt was being undone. Suddenly, the light began to take on a shape. As I approached, I noticed a central figure, radiating a glory impossible to describe. It wasn't like any image of Jesus I had ever seen before, but I knew in my gut that it was him. His appearance was both simple and grand. His eyes seemed to contain the entire universe, and his gaze penetrated me with such depth that I felt he saw everything I was. The flaws, the fears, the moments of doubt, but still loved me unconditionally. "Raven," he said, and his voice was like soft thunder. Each word reverberated within me, as if he were speaking directly to my soul. "You're not here by chance. There's something I need to show you." I couldn't speak. She was paralyzed, but not with fear, but with reverence. Jesus reached out his hand, and when I touched his palm, I was overcome by a wave of love that brought tears to my eyes. "Why me?" I managed to ask, my voice echoing in the void around us. "Because you have an important role to play," he replied. "You underestimate the power of prayers and the impact they have, both on your life and the lives of those around you. I will show you what happens in the spiritual realm when someone prays." With a wave of his hand, the environment around us changed. The light gave way to a vast scenery, like an endless battlefield. There were figures that looked like angels, glowing with intensity, facing other forms that I could only describe as evil shadows. It was a war I never knew was happening, but it felt as real as any conflict on earth. "Every prayer is a weapon," Jesus said, as he led me through that field. "And now, you'll see the impact they make." As Jesus led me across that vast spiritual battlefield, I realized that the fight was far more intense and complex than I could have ever imagined. There were huge fortresses, made of dense shadows, with frightening shapes that seemed alive, pulsing with negative energy. They rose on the horizon like mountains of pure evil, surrounded by an oppressive atmosphere. Even from a distance, I could feel the destructive force emanating from them. "These are spiritual fortresses," Jesus explained, with a calm that contrasted with the scene around us. "They represent areas of life where evil has influence. Some are created by hatred, hurt, or unbelief. Others are fueled by fear, guilt, and unforgiveness." As he spoke, I saw a small beam of light cross the sky and strike one of these fortresses. Immediately, the structure shook, cracks began to form, and the oppressive energy emanating from it subsided. I looked at Jesus, confused. "What was that?" I asked. "A prayer," he replied. "Someone on earth just prayed in faith. Even though it was a short prayer, its impact was enough to weaken this stronghold." My mind struggled to understand. Then he continued, "Every prayer, Raven, no matter how simple or short, has a direct impact here. Words like, 'In the name of Jesus,' are like spiritual earthquakes that bring down these structures. However, the enemy does not stand still. He constantly works to stop people from praying." Jesus gestured to the other side of the field, and there I saw smaller but agile and agitated shadows surrounding people on earth. These demonic figures whispered distractions, fears, and doubts, like an invisible current. I saw a woman holding a cell phone, clearly ready to pray, but something in her mind seemed to divert her. "Maybe I'll pray later," she said to herself as she put the phone aside. Immediately, the shadows around him vibrated with satisfaction. "You see?" Jesus asked, sadness in his voice. "They use every weapon available: distraction, fatigue, false urgency. But watch what happens when someone persists." In another scene, a man kneeling in prayer murmured, "God, I don't know how, but please help me." An intense light exploded from his mouth, and the shadows around him fled in despair. The fortresses began to crumble with greater intensity, and angels appeared, fighting with renewed vigor. Jesus turned to me. "Understand this, Raven. No prayer is insignificant. Every word spoken in faith makes an eternal difference. Now, I want to show you something even deeper." He pointed to a specific fortress that looked different. She didn't tremble at ordinary prayers, but when someone said the words, "I forgive," a colossal impact happened. The fortress began to collapse in cascades of light. "Prayers for forgiveness," Jesus explained, "are powerful weapons that break the strongest chains." After showing me the spiritual impact of prayers, Jesus stopped and looked at me with an intensity that made me feel small, but at the same time infinitely loved. His expression was serious, as if what he was about to teach me was the most important truth of all. "Raven," he began, "you need to understand that prayer is not just a habit or a tradition. It is a powerful spiritual weapon, capable of changing realities in the visible and invisible realms." He gestured, and before us several scenes appeared. In one of them, I saw a young mother on her knees beside her bed, praying for her children. His words were simple, almost whispered, "Lord, protect my children. Guide them and keep them." To my surprise, these seemingly ordinary words created a wave of light that radiated around her, repelling shadows and strengthening a barrier around her home. "She doesn't see the impact of her words," Jesus explained, "but this mother's every prayer is building walls of protection around her family." In another scene, I saw an elderly man in an empty church, holding a rosary as he prayed, "Father, take care of future generations. May my family walk in your light." Suddenly, I saw angels moving, reinforcing protections around people he didn't even know, grandchildren and great-grandchildren he would never meet in life, but who were being protected by his words. "The impact of a prayer can span generations," Jesus said, with a glimmer of pride in his voice. "Even after those who prayed are no longer on earth, their words still echo and continue to protect and guide." He then showed a third scene, which made me gasp. I saw a woman praying in a busy office, her words brief and silent. "God, help me with this." However, this simple prayer created cracks in a demonic stronghold that once seemed impenetrable. The enemy tries to convince people that short, simple prayers are meaningless, Jesus explained. But no prayer prayed in faith is insignificant. Finally, Jesus pointed to a group of people praying together, holding hands in a circle. Their collective prayer created an impenetrable barrier of light that caused legions of shadows to retreat. Prayer in unity has an even greater impact, he said. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in their midst, and the heavens move. Then, in a more solemn tone, he added, the enemy's greatest trick is to convince people not to pray. He uses distractions, weariness, and even doubt to keep people from this powerful act. But, Raven, you have seen the truth. Now it's your responsibility to share this. I just nodded, with tears in my eyes, promising that I would do whatever it took to get this message to the world. After Jesus showed me the impact of prayer in the spiritual world, he began to teach me how to apply these truths in my everyday life. His words were not just grand revelations, but practical advice that could transform my life and the lives of others. Raven, he began, with a patient and compassionate tone, don't think that prayer is something reserved for special or grand moments. It should be part of your everyday life, like breathing. I want you to see how you can use this power, even in situations that seem small or insignificant. He gestured, and a new scene appeared before us. It was an ordinary day at the school where I worked. I saw one of my students, Michael, sitting alone in the courtyard, clearly struggling with something he couldn't express. He was a shy boy, always anxious, and I often worried about him. In the scene, I saw myself silently praying as I walked past him. Lord, give peace to Michael's heart. Immediately, the anxiety that surrounded him, represented by a dark fog, began to dissipate. A soft light enveloped him, and he seemed to breathe more easily. You don't need eloquent words, Raven, Jesus explained. Your prayer was heard and answered, because it came from the heart. Another scene emerged. This time, it was a situation in which I felt wronged. I found myself confronting a coworker who had accused me of something I didn't do. My first reaction was anger and resentment, but then in the vision I heard myself praying, God, help me to forgive and act in love. The words created an immediate impact. The heavy hurt energy around me was replaced with a calm that allowed me to handle the situation with grace. Jesus smiled and said, forgiveness is one of the most powerful prayers you can pray. It not only sets you free, but it also dismantles networks of resentment in the spiritual realm. Finally, he showed me a scene where my niece, Sophia, just 10 years old, was praying with me before going to sleep. His words were simple, Jesus, protect my aunt and help me at school. But what I saw was something extraordinary. Angels descended, surrounding his small bed, while bright lights chased away any shadows. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder and said, never underestimate the power of children's prayers. They have pure faith that moves the heavens in ways you don't yet understand. When the scene disappeared, I turned my gaze to him, determined. Okay, what if I fail, Lord? What if I get distracted or feel like I can't do it? He responded tenderly, you will fail at times, Raven, because you are human. But remember, persistence in praying, even in the face of distractions, is a victory in itself. Every heartfelt word is an act of faith that echoes around the world, spiritual. The last thing I remember from the spiritual realm was the look in Jesus' eyes, full of love and hope. He said something that stuck in my soul. Raven, you have a mission now. Go back and teach others to see the power in their prayers. I will be with you every step of the way. Suddenly, I felt like I was being pulled backwards, with a force so intense it almost felt physical. The light disappeared, and I was enveloped in a cold, heavy darkness. I heard muffled sounds, voices, machines, footsteps. I felt a crushing pressure in my chest, as if my soul was being forced to fit back into a very small space. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the white ceiling of the hospital. She's back. She's breathing, I heard someone exclaim. My vision was still blurry, but I soon noticed the face of Eleanor Drake, the school nurse, looking at me with tears in her eyes. Raven, you're alive, she whispered, holding my hand. The doctor rushed into the room, almost knocking over the tray of instruments next to him. That's impossible, he muttered, as he scanned the monitors. She was dead for 33 minutes. There is no brain damage, no signs of hypoxia. It defies all medical logic. I wanted to tell them what had happened, but my voice wouldn't come out. It wasn't the time. I knew that what I had witnessed was not something that could be explained in a few words. The days that followed were a mix of medical perplexity and celebration. My co-workers and even doctors called my recovery a miracle. But for me, it was more than that. It was a calling. Shortly after being discharged, I realized that something within me had changed profoundly. Before, I prayed automatically, as if it were a duty. Now, every word I said seemed to carry a strength I had never felt before. I felt as if I was in direct contact with something greater, something that surpassed my earthly understanding. When I returned to school, my students and colleagues noticed the difference. "You seem more calm," said a colleague, like I was at peace. Even with all the chaos around me, I knew she was right. The peace I felt in the spiritual realm was still with me. It was like an anchor, keeping me steady even in the face of life's storms. That week, I organized my first prayer time with the students. I asked each child to say a simple sentence, something they were grateful for, or something they wanted to ask God for. To my surprise, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. It was as if an invisible light had filled the space. It was then that I realized my mission was not just to pray, but to teach others to pray as well. The days and weeks following my return to life were full of reflections and adjustments. Everything looked different, even the simplest things, like the wind blowing the leaves off the trees or a child's laughter, had a deeper meaning. I knew that I had been transformed, not just physically, but spiritually, and that this change could not be contained just within me. I needed to share my experience. The first opportunity came when my 10-year-old niece Sophia visited me. "Aunt Raven, Mommy said you almost went to heaven. Is it true?" she asked with her big curious eyes. I took a deep breath and knelt down next to him. "Yes, Sophia, I went to heaven, but Jesus sent me back because he wanted me to teach something very important, the power of prayers." She frowned, intrigued. "But I only know how to pray simple things, like, 'God, help me at school.' Is that important?" I held his hands and looked into his eyes. "Aunt Sophia, every prayer, even the shortest and simplest ones, is important. Jesus showed me that even small words like, 'God, help me,' have the power to change things, here on earth and in heaven. Did you know that your have prayers ever protected people around you?" She smiled shyly. "Serious?" "Yes, really," I said, stroking his face. "I'll never underestimate what God can do with the words that come from your heart." I decided I needed to take this message beyond my family. I organized an evening of prayer at school, inviting colleagues, parents, and students. To my surprise, many people showed up, including Eleanor, the nurse who saved me, and even the skeptical doctor, Thomas Lark, the doctor who had declared me a miracle. That night, I shared my experience publicly for the first time. I told about the light, about Jesus, and about the spiritual strongholds I saw. I told him about the power of prayers and how even the simplest prayers could destroy evil works and bring divine protection. As I spoke, I could see tears in the eyes of many present. When we finished, I asked everyone to pray together, even if it was just silently. What happened next was something I will never forget. An indescribable peace filled the auditorium, and many reported feeling an inexplicable warmth, as if they had been hugged. A mother came up to me at the end and said, "I hadn't prayed in years, but today I felt something shift inside me." That night, as I returned home, I reflected on everything Jesus had shown me. He taught me that prayer was not just a religious practice, but an act of love, a gesture of faith, and a powerful weapon against evil. His message was clear. Every prayer has impact and none is insignificant. I leave this story as a testimony. What I saw and learned was not just for me, but for all of us. If you are reading or listening to this, know that your prayers have eternal value. It doesn't matter how simple or short what you say is. God listens, and every word makes a difference. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.